everyone, Katarina here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I have for you another complete DIY card, or actually two cards, but I was planning to make only the one with the wreath and roses. I wanted to paint roses for a while, but I find them so intimidating. If you are new to my channel, I'm quite a beginner when it comes to painting or drawing things myself. I mainly use stamps, but time to time I like to paint something completely from scratch. That means if you are a beginner yourself, this project is definitely for you, because if I can do this, anyone can. Let's start with the supplies you will be needing, and you don't need much. All you need is watercolors, watercolor brushes. You also need a watercolor cardstock, a jar or two with water, and a paper towel to soak up excess water from your brush. Since this is going to be a card, you also will need a card base. You can make them yourself or buy them already pre-made with envelopes. The rest of the stuff I'm going to be using for this card is completely optional. As always, in preparation for this video, I practiced. I needed to work on the strokes, what brushes to use, and the general shape of the rose. And to get as much practice as possible, I used both sides of the cardstock. I watched multiple tutorials here on YouTube. I will have a playlist in the description below if you want to check it out. It's very helpful because everyone paints it slightly differently. So let me show you first how I approach the painting. I mix few colors with water on my mixing palette, but for this example I will use only a mixture of pinks. For the petals you paint slightly curved lines, I think it's called C-curve, and you are creating a bundle of petals that go around the middle part. You start with very small strokes, more saturated color in the middle, and then you expand into more lighter color for the outer petals. So I started in the middle with very small strokes using only the tip of my brush, and then I painted the other strokes for the petals around the middle, going in a circle, making the petals wider and wider. There are a few things I was aiming at. I wanted the petals to have some kind of a clear shape, so you can actually see the individual petals. I saw some people painting the individual petals only in the middle, but the outside petals were just like a big blob, which I'm not sure if I like. I also wanted to have a little bit of white space between the petals, not too much. Did it work on this rose? Not really, but I'm happy with the result. And I prefer this over those that look like a blob. The main thing I struggled with are the outside petals. I'm not really comfortable using one brush for everything. I was using a size 6 brush. Maybe if I swapped for a bigger brush, the results would be better. Also, I wanted to fill the whole panel, so maybe I painted too many rows of petals. Maybe I should have started with thicker petals already on the second or third row. What I'm trying to say, I still need practice, and while the shape of the petals is not the best, I like the result. The only thing I actually do not like, that really bugs me, is the even number of the outer petals, especially when it's the number 4. It can be any other even number, but to me 4 looks way too symmetrical. I added few little petals at the end, but you can still see the 4 petals. So if you are like me and don't like the number 4, watch out for that. So this is the general way of painting the rose. You might be more successful with your strokes, but I would say this is pretty much a beginner level rose, and I really like it. Originally, I wanted to paint a bundle of roses like I did in this example. However, as I said, the bigger strokes I found quite difficult. Therefore, I decided to do smaller roses with only a few layers of the petals, which I find way easier to paint. And I decided to put them onto a wreath. The wreath I'm going to paint is the same as the one I painted for one of my Christmas cards last year, but this time I will be adding 3 roses in 3 different colors. You can call this a Wreath 2.0, or maybe like 1.2. I did not really change much, I just added those roses. I'm starting with drawing a circle for which I used a cap. I drew the circle at the top part of the cardstock because I'm going to add a sentiment, but if you are not adding any words to your card, you can place it in the middle. I erased 3 sections on the wreath where I wanted to have the roses. I started painting the first rose. I used the same pink I used on my example, but a little bit more saturated. For the second rose, I will be using purple, and for the third rose, I will be using yellow. And I painted it the same way as I showed you earlier, starting with tiny strokes, expanding to bigger ones that go around the middle. When I finished painting the rose, I started working on the leaves. I mixed a green with brown or blue, something like that. I originally wanted to have different colors of the leaves, but in the end I stuck with one color not to make it too complicated. The color of the roses and the color of the leaves is all up to you. You can mix your own colors or just mix one color with water or use the paint directly from the pan. The leaves I'm painting here are in kind of a raindrop shape. I'm not really good at painting leaves, and this is quite an easy shape that you can do. Also, I didn't paint the pair of the leaves directly side by side. The inside leaf was slightly higher than the outside leaf. And I repeated this process until I reached the place where the next rose will be. After I was finished with the roses and the leaves, I decided to add a few berries. I painted them blue, but you can use whatever color you like. You can put as many berries on the wreath as you want. I was changing between 1, 2 and 3 berries between the leaves. Next, I painted the circle to cover the pencil line and give the leaves something to hold on. For my Christmas wreath, I used brown, but for this one, I thought gold will look good. So I took my Kuretake Gonsai Tambi Golden watercolors and I used the darkest gold in the set. If the wreath was more fuller or had more branches, this would not be needed, but then that would be for the Wreath 2.0, which is something for the future. Next, I decided to add splatter, which is completely optional, but every time I'm using watercolors and I think there's too much of a white space, I just add splatter to fill it up. I used some of the colors I used on the wreath. I used blue, green and the golden colors. And then I let it dry. And while the piece was drying, I thought that the practice rose did not look too bad, so I decided to turn it into a card as well. And to do that, I was going to paint the stem and few leaves. The stem was easy. I painted it in a curved shape, but the leaves, yeah, they are my enemy number one. But maybe this is because all those people I watch, they use 1 or 2 strokes, which I cannot do. I tried, but I had to come back few times with my brush to get the shape. In the playlist with the various roses tutorials, I will also include a tutorial about how to paint leaves by Jenna Rainey, which is very helpful. To paint the leaves, I started with the stem that is attached to the leaf, and then I painted the leaf, really trying to follow what Jenna was saying in her tutorial, pointing the handle of the brush in the direction where you want the leaf to point. And even though I had to do more brush strokes on the leaves than 2, I started with pressing on the brush and then was really concentrating on slowly releasing the brush to get the pointy tip of the leaf. And being very slow is very important. I painted 3 leaves, 1 on the left and 2 on the right, leaving a gap on the right side big enough for the sentiment. And I must say, I was really happy how the leaves turned out. At this point, you can adhere the panels on top of a card base, but as a card maker, I almost always add a sentiment. You can write the sentiment yourself, or like me here, you can use stamps. I picked a Happy Mother's Day sentiment from an older stamp set by Clearly Besotted. In the UK and Ireland, they celebrate Mother's Day in March, if you did not know that, and this is why I'm making a Mother's Day card. On both cards, I was going to stamp the sentiment with a black ink, which would look great, but when I was looking at the card with the wreath, I decided to use an embossing powder and heat emboss the sentiment to match the gold on the wreath. I'm going to be using my stamping tool for the stamping, but you can also use an acrylic block if you don't have such a tool. I started by applying an anti-static powder. The powder is from EK Success powder tool, and I had to transfer it to this jar and use a brush because the original container broke. Then I used the Versamark ink, which is a sticky ink, perfect for heat embossing, and I stamped the sentiment below the wreath. Next, I took the embossing powder, which is actually in the color metallic brass. It matched the color of the golden circle better than the actual metallic gold powder. I sprinkled it on the sentiment, and then I took my heat tool and I melted the powder. And for the card with a single rose, I just stamped the sentiment with a black ink. I thought I was finished, but I wanted to use a white card base for the panels, and because the watercolor cardstock is more like off-white and the card base is bright white, the whites didn't match, so I wanted to create some kind of separation between those two. There are a few options that you can do. I decided to use the gold watercolors and I painted a border along the edges of the panel. This is super easy, you just need to find a good angle for the brush to apply the color. I did this on both panels and I think having a gold border on the edges of the panels brings it all together. And since I was using the watercolors again for the border, I thought the panel with a single rose needs some splatter as well, so I splattered some gold and green across the panel and I let it dry. Lastly, I adhered the panels on top of the white card bases. I used a simple double-sided tape to adhere the panels, but you can also use a foam tape if you would like to add a little bit of dimension. And that finishes the cards for today. You could also add some embellishments like enamel dots or sequins, but I'm happy with just the splatter and the gold paint on the edges. For the whole month of March, I'm back with making cards using stamps. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you are subscribed to my channel. And if you like this video, I would really appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. You can follow me on Instagram and Pinterest and hop over to my blog where you can find photos of the cards and the supply list. The links you can find in the description below. If you would like to make more cards like these completely from scratch, you can click on the playlist that is showing on your screens now, where you can find a bunch of such cards. All of them are very simple cards, perfect for beginners. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.